We often hear the tales of great heroes that save entire worlds from scheming gods, or lead a civilization to victory in a dark hour, claim and begin empires, as well as rescuing a countless amount of people in the process. But there are some tales out there that are not as often told, tales that may have been forgotten of heroes that deserve that title just as much as those considered to be above them. The heroes that achieve great things on a smaller scale, that save a local community from a dangerous threat, or even solve a problem so many thought was unsolvable. Some of these great individuals pass into legend, while others are simply forgotten. Jib the Eradicator, also known as the Magnificent or just Jib, was one such hero whose story and name has gone widely unremembered. Saint Jib, as he is or was commonly known as, was a saint of the Tribunal Temple, later known as the New Temple in Morrowind. Skooma addict, assassin, prisoner, saint. Throughout his life, Jib was all of these things, but to one adventurer in particular, he was nothing more than a fellow prisoner aboard an Imperial prison ship bound for Morrowind. Hello everyone, I am Redbeak Raven and welcome to the story of Jib. So sit back and relax, watch and or listen, as we dive into the story of the Dunmer that ended the Winged Menace. Throughout the province of Morrowind, you can find flying high in the sky winged creatures known as cliff racers. Most of the time, these airborne nuisances attack anyone within sight. A lone cliff racer may not be the most dangerous enemy for an adventurer or even an armed citizen travelling from one place to another, but get caught between a few of them and you could be looking at a difficult fight. Their ability to fly as well as having excellent vision enables them to stalk unwary travellers. Sometimes swarms of racers are seen attacking people, and while the creatures themselves aren't that tough, well, like so many other things, they are dangerous in numbers. There are some reports from the Second Era that mention cliff racers circling the cities in Morrowind, but I'd take a guess that they were smart enough not to attack such a large group of people. While cliff racers in mainland Morrowind have been known to exist, their numbers are nowhere near those that once populated the island of Vvardenfell's skies. For many years, the airborne creatures plagued the island's roads, hills and mountains, making travelling around the island a more dangerous task than it probably already was. Many citizens most likely favoured the Mages Guild teleportation services for this reason alone. Plus, the prices for teleportation were actually quite reasonable, cheaper than a boat and Siltstrider in fact. So the cliff racers were a big problem for Vvardenfell, and a rather peculiar individual once told me about an adventurer who in the Third Era during the resurgence of the Sixth House explored the island on numerous occasions, but each and every day they travelled away from the settlements they would be attacked by these creatures. They said the fights against them were more annoying than difficult, more so because they found it a challenge to actually land a hit on the winged menaces. It was also odd because the adventurer felt that as time went on and they became more experienced, more cliff racers appeared to swarm them. Perhaps they made an arch-enemy of the creatures and they were smart enough to attack this individual in numbers. Who knows? Stranger things have happened in Tamriel, but in a bookshell, cliff racers were dangerous and annoying, and thanks to Jib, should never ever be a problem again. Ever. Now you might be wondering what all that has to do with Saint Jib. Well, you see, cliff racers are a fundamental part of Jib's life. Knowing and understanding why the eradication of these creatures was important, I think is a vital part of Jib's story. In the Third Era, before Jib became a saint of the temple, he was a freelance assassin that murdered for money in order to pay for his skooma addiction, a rather nasty condition that has been known to leave its victims with mental deterioration, and the addiction itself is mostly thought to be incurable, despite the fact that cures have indeed existed. Assassins in Morrowind usually did pretty well for themselves, as killing was in high demand over there, especially when it came to differences within the great houses. Nothing like a rivalry within a faction to encourage the spilling of blood. Jib was eventually caught by the authorities during a failed assassination attempt on a high-ranking official of House Redorin. You see, he wasn't the only assassin hired to kill the official. In fact, he was actually the illegal method of murder, for the rival assassin that reached the target first was in fact a member of the Morag Tong, the legally sanctioned organisation for assassins. Whether the person who hired Jib was the same one who hired the Morag Tong is anyone's guess, but either way it was clear that only one assassin was getting away with that murder. In order to cover his tracks, the rival assassin alerted the guards and thus caused Jib to walk into a trap. He was then tried for murder and imprisoned in Vivec City's jail. Eventually, Jib was transported to another prison away from Morrowind, most likely the fabled prison found in the Imperial City. In the year 427 of the Third Era, Jib and one other prisoner who was taken from the Imperial prison were put on a prison ship bound for Morrowind. The other prisoner is actually believed to have been the Nerevarine, who some say was sent to Vardenfell at the request of the Emperor, who supposedly believed the other prisoner was the Nerevar incarnate. So after a long voyage, the two prisoners were released in the port of Seyda-Neen, a small village in the southern Bitter Coast region in Vardenfell. It was a common stop for Imperial travellers going to and from the island, so you could expect that Imperial prisoners would have been freed there. Upon arriving in Morrowind, Jib decided to turn his life around after spending much time in prison, regretting a lot of his earlier actions. He felt the need to give something to the people of Morrowind and realised that the best way he could help was by eradicating the cliff racers that plagued the island. And so, atop a Siltstrider with a bow and sword, Jib began his campaign against the Winged Menace. No one is certain how long Jib was out there fighting the notorious creatures, but we do know that the final battle against them lasted for 2 full days. There's a very valuable book I happened to come across once called Jib's Opus, that is said to have been written by Jib himself after death, if you believe such a thing. According to that book, Jib was tracking across the ash wastes of Morrowind what he called a Lingerer, which is described as a cliff racer without a nest. He managed to wound the Lingerer in a previous fight, but the creature managed to escape and continued to fly on, and after almost 2 hours of chasing it, Jib decided to use his last arrow on the racer before it disappeared. With luck or whatever else on his side, the arrow struck its target, and with a final cry, the cliff racer fell. Soon after, however, Jib heard the sound of more than 100 wings flapping in the distance, and rising from a foyer came an entire colony of cliff racers, and thus his final battle against the menace began. Believing the cliff racers had become a lot more intelligent and managed to set a trap for him, Jib considered this to be the end, but he wasn't going down without taking as many of the creatures as he could with him. With a hit on the beast's leg, he sent his Siltstrider away from the fight, and as the swarm of creatures came closer, he held his sword high and prepared for one last battle. The battle lasted 2 days, and at the end of it, Jib survived. He was beaten, clawed, bitten and knocked down many times, but at the end of the day, 76 cliff racers lay dead, and as he smiled up at the heavens, he collapsed. He awoke to find himself in the presence of Lord Vivec, one of the 3 immortal god kings of Morrowind. It seems that Vivec rescued Jib from death and decided to make him a saint. From that moment onwards, the Eradicator was considered a hero by the people of Morrowind and would be known forever as Saint Jib. There's even an event named after him. I'm told that St. Jib's Fair is quite the popular celebration amongst the Dunmers, especially in the Cyrodiilic city of Cheydinhal. Now you might expect for the story to end there, however there was more in store for the Dunmer Saint. A number of years later, following his ascension to sainthood, Jib moved to the Cyrodiilic city of Kvatch, where he began writing his memoirs. Unfortunately, however, the Oblivion Crisis occurred while he was living in the city in 3E433. As you may already know, Kvatch was invaded by Mehrunes Dagon's forces of Daedra, and as Jib was writing, a group of Daedra burst into his home and forced upon him a fate that is considered by many to be worse than death. I've been told by quite a reliable source that his soul was trapped by a Dremora and was cast to the Soul Cairn, a realm of oblivion filled with the trapped souls of mortal dead, controlled by the ominous beings that arrogantly call themselves the Ideal Masters. The individual I spoke to about this was the very person who allowed me to read Jib's Opus, and with all the information they presented to me, it was hard not to believe that what they were showing and telling me was true. The rumours of St. Jib's death, after all, shocked and puzzled many of the citizens of Tamriel. Most believed that he died in Morrowind. Apparently, the Jib wandering the Soul Cairn had been for centuries oblivious to his own death. He thought he had only been imprisoned by the Dremora. The individual I spoke to told me that someone quite unique had stumbled upon Jib in the Soul Cairn itself, and it was in this meeting that the saint realised he was dead. Wanting to be remembered and his story be known, Jib tasked this unique person with finding the lost pages of his opus so that he could complete his memoir. The adventurer was successful in recovering the pages, and Jib was then able to give them a completed copy of his book, the very book I myself saw. I'm not sure what happened to the book after that. I presume it or copies of it are circling Tamriel as we speak, but some people do like to keep history to themselves, although I'm sure it will get out there eventually. As for what happened to St. Jib next, well, I suppose only the adventurer knows. As for the cliff racers, well, following Jib's final battle against against them, they were successfully driven from Vardenfell. But the unfortunate thing is, Red Mountain eventually erupted, which covered most of the island in ash, therefore making it mostly inhabitable. Although I'm sure the years free of cliff races leading up to its eruption were enjoyed by the island's population. Although if I recall a conversation I had with an alchemist following Jib's success, they seemed pretty upset that it suddenly became a lot harder to obtain racer plumes, which were used throughout the Empire as decorations for garments and household goods. Alchemists are more interested in them, however, for the useful alchemical effect of levitation they had. There's no pleasing some people, is there? Oh well. Maybe Jib's exploits will live on now that his opus is out there. You know, it's a shame that the cliff racers weren't driven off by the time I visited Vardenfell. Have you ever journeyed somewhere while being constantly attacked by a flying nuisance, only to kill said nuisance and have another reappear within seconds? Yeah, I didn't get much sleep on the road in Morrowind. Trust me when I say what Saint Jib did not only saved lives, but people's sanity as well. They made him a saint. I would have made him a god.